Good morning. Pat Zemer here with the AM edition of Office Hours for this Tuesday. Glad to be here. Got a lot of things that we want to talk about this morning, so if you have any questions, please feel free to post them. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have with regard to PEMF therapy, Magna Wave devices, training, the industry in general, where things are in the industry, whatever you may have. I'd be happy to answer those questions for you this morning. Just be so kind as to put them in the box here on the Facebook page, and we'll take a look at them and certainly get you the answers that you're looking for. For those of you who are new to the program, my name is Pat Zemer. I'm the founder and CEO of Magna Wave. We are a pulsed electromagnetic field therapy company. We distribute and PEMF equipment for several companies, and we've been doing so since 2002. So we've been at it for a long time with regard to PEMF therapy and devices and how they work and what they do. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. A couple of things I want to get to here as we head in. So again, if you have any questions, just pop them in there. And if you're watching and you're someone who's watched before or you're a practitioner, put in the question that you've been asked the most. You may not have any questions today that you want answered, but perhaps you could put in the question that you receive the most from the people that you talk to as you travel around providing your services. So I received a question earlier this week about megaesophagus in animals. That's where the esophagus is limp, or it just doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or it's larger and so it doesn't push the foods, and it becomes very what the esophagus does is it kind of massages the food through your throat into your system, and that's how it works. Well, if it's enlarged, and quite often it happens in animals, then it can't move the food. You'll see an animal that has to be sitting up or up in order to eat so the food can fall or by gravity move through the esophagus. So the question is, will Magna Wave help that? Well, as you know, and we discuss all the time, we do not specifically treat conditions. We treat the body, we provide energy to the body so it can better facilitate its own healing and its own processes. We do a lot of cellular exercise, it's quite often called. We do muscular exercise, if you will. So if the esophagus is in such a state that the flexation and palpitation can help it, then a Magna Wave could be beneficial to that type of condition that someone may have. Is it going to change or heal that condition? We don't do that. We simply work on the body, provide energy, provide some exercise to the cells, to the muscle, soft tissue structure that can help it better take care of itself. Big issue, and it's that when it happens, it's no fun to deal with. Could it be a complementary method to that? Certainly. If you have a horse or a dog or an animal that has that, certainly talk to your veterinarian about what options are available. Discuss with them about Magna Wave and the massaging effect or the flexing effect of the Magna Wave on the muscle tissue, and see what the thoughts may be. But it could be a very complementary process to those types of situations. Another question that I received is talking about tricep myopathy. And what quite often happens when they'll do a surgical procedure on a shoulder or somewhere, and they're using an anesthetic, and it's almost like an atrophy of the area, and then you have trouble after the surgery getting the area to develop and not have issues as a result of the surgery and the antiseptic anesthesia that was utilized. Again, can we provide some cellular health to the body with the energy that we do, and provide palpitation to the muscle area and the soft tissue to help it not worsen, and to maybe help it be healthier through cellular wise to better deal with that type situation? For sure. And that's basically what we are. We're supplying energy, we're massaging, pulsating the area, and helping it be good. In a lot of types of situations where we want to keep something from getting worse, we've had animals that had some atrophy in the hips, or someone has some atrophy in a muscle, and by massaging and keeping the oxygenation to the area very, very good, then that keeps things from deteriorating further. The body can better work on itself and keep conditions from potentially becoming worse. And so that's what we want to do when we go in. Basically, PEMF therapy is providing the opportunity for the body to better take care of itself. The neat thing about it is it does this rapidly and allows the body to get after something in a fast fashion. So, if you have any questions, a couple of very good questions there, I'd be happy to answer those questions for you at this point in time. Let me see what I've got here. I've got a couple other questions that come in. Do you work with agencies? Well, or privately, do you accept insurance? Most of our practitioners operate on a cash business. So insurance is not something that is readily available for this type of therapy at this point in time. What happens when you have FDA approval, then insurance companies were more likely to pay for services if you have an FDA-approved device. But even FDA approval does not guarantee that an insurance company is going to step up and foot the bill for a device, depending on what the expense or how much the expense is. But as a rule, most of our practitioners operate on a cash basis and do not necessarily work with insurance companies. I think you'll find if you're exploring, checking out to see if something like this can be beneficial to you or make you feel better with the energy supplementation provided by the Magna Wave type of devices, then certainly there are trials and ways that people will work with you to give you some reassurance as to how this can work with you. So good morning, Kathy. Thank you for joining us. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to post them at this time. What I want to talk about today, until we get another question, is what I call the great myth about Gauss. And Gauss is something, frequency. People quite often ask, well, what frequency and what is the Gauss? What is the strength of the machines? And frankly, it's all over the board. If you go look at, and it's very confusing, you go look at various companies' websites and they'll put on there that we're 4 times stronger than anything on the market, and we get up to 40 or 50,000 Gauss. I even saw an email last week where someone was just, they were so off on their email, they were talking about being 3.2 Tesla, and what Tesla is 10,000. So if someone's 3.2 Tesla, that's meaning they're 32,000 Gauss, so it's just amazing where people go with the Gauss numbers. It's very difficult. The reason is when you're talking about low power devices. So let's talk about devices that are low power. That would be quite often the Beamer device, the QRS device, the Curatron devices that operate in the low power, low frequency area of power. And most of those devices measure their power in milligauss or microtesla or millitesla. And what that means, if you extrapolate all the numbers, you're dealing in you're dealing in lower Gauss figures. You might be dealing in figures of 50, 100, 75 Gauss, which is fine if you want to use that type of device, and if that type of device will take care of your needs, then you're in the money. But that's what those millitesla or microgauss or the whole different numbers, when you extrapolate them out and look at the real hard Gauss figures, you're talking about lower numbers. That's fine. And then when you get into the higher powered devices, like the high voltage, low frequency devices, that the Magna Wave devices fall into that category. Now, we do have some low power devices, but as to discuss in the high powered category, that's where you get figures that are all over the board. Someone will say, my machine is 2 Tesla, which is 20,000 gals. Or my machine is 1.7 Tesla, which is 17,000 gals. Or, again, the numbers go all over. Well, the challenge is there aren't many devices available that will accurately measure the gauss of these machines. In fact, I know one website that says our devices are 4 times more powerful than anybody else's on the market, or 3 times more powerful than anybody else's on the market. But then when you ask them what the specific numbers are, they don't have them because they tell you, and I'm not knocking them, but they tell you there's really no way to accurately measure the device on the Gauss on these machines or the Tesla on these machines, but we're more powerful. And so where does that leave you? And over the years, people have posted figures, 3,500 Gauss, 10,000 Gauss, 20,000 Gauss, and again, there's really not very many devices that will measure this signal. Why? Because most magnetometers are designed to read a wave that is continual. It doesn't stop. So with those, you can get a device and the wave continues, and there are devices that will measure those. And those are more the low-power devices are measured in that fashion because they are what they call oscillating waves. They don't start and stop. When you get into a high-power device like a Magna Wave, what happens is the signal fires, or the signal is released and it goes up, and then some of them are square, some of them are rounded at the top, some of them are more of a sawtooth at the top. Bottom line is the real health comes from the rate of slew. When it gets up here, if it falls off quickly, that's where NASA, Dr. Bob Dennis, has found that the real healing capability comes from these waves. With that aside, what happens, these waves shoot and stop. Shoot and stop. So the measuring device really doesn't keep going, so it doesn't know where to measure. It doesn't know what the power is that it's going to adequately show you on the screen. So because of that, and for years these are just numbers that have been used when you talk about the devices. So there are a few devices that we have had made that will adequately measure the power of these high power, low frequency devices like we have. And I have one here. Now, the challenge becomes if someone goes out and uses these devices and measures the number and puts up what the actual number is, they're going to be way off the board as compared to what people say the power of their devices produce. What we can tell you is that you produce a massive amount of energy that goes into the body, helps the body receive this energy, sets up the blood cells so they can take on more oxygen. And if they can take on more oxygen, they can better do their job. They're healthier. They fight disease in a more valuable fashion. They help inflammation go away, which relieves pain, which allows the body to get on the process of healing itself. And that's basically what we're looking for. Now, so when you talk about how much is that, well, again, those numbers are all over the board. And so we've kind of taken the position that we produce enough energy to do what needs to happen. And it does. And we produce a lot of energy, a massive amount of energy. What is the number? Well, again, if we start talking numbers, then we're going to be all over the board, and where people don't do their homework or don't get the opportunity to do their homework is someone will publish a number, and they say, that's the number. It's 20,000 Gauss, or it's 30,000 Gauss. That's what our machine produces. And yet, really, it's only half of that. Maybe it's 15,000 Gauss, and it's not 30,000 Gauss. But it doesn't make any difference. It's power, and it does the job. And so it becomes very difficult to turn around and look at what the Gauss figures are. I've got a device. I'd be happy to measure and to check and measure any device that's out there to see how much stronger it is than someone else's device. And we've measured our devices, and we have the numbers of what those Gauss figures are and how they operate and project. The problem is it's all over the board. So if someone tells you a number, it's very difficult to gauge that. Now, what we'd like to see happen is that everybody has devices that can measure their signals, and everybody measures their signals with a device that's recognized and accepted by everyone, and those are the numbers that we go with. Ultimately, that's not going to make any difference because various machines work just fine. But it will stop the area, or will kind of clean up the area to where they're just numbers that are being put out there that are really unable to be accurately substantiated as to what they are. So we propose to have unified, accepted machinery to measure these, and then everybody use this machinery and agree that those are the numbers that they're going to operate with, and then that'll basically help clear everything up and everybody be on the same playing field when they talk about the strength of their machines and the Tesla delivered or the Gauss that's delivered. It's the same thing with frequency. Most of these devices operate on what they call low frequency, which means they're below the radio signal frequency lines. They operate between, many of them operate at 10 hertz or a frequency. Many of them operate between 50 and 60 hertz. And as Dr. Dennis has recently pointed out, it doesn't make any difference. If someone tells you that they got this result using a device at 30 hertz and it worked, that doesn't mean that 25 hertz or 40 hertz will not work. They don't go there. They just go with the hertz that they used, or they go with the power or the Gauss that they used, that they were able to measure at that point, or think that they were able to measure, to use to attain those types of results. We know, as Dr. Dennis points out, we know what this does. We know that it sets the body up to be in a position to heal itself. Do we know right down to the mitochondrial ultimate molecular level what it does to the area to make that happen? No. They don't go there when they do research. What they do is they pick a standard, they do research, and if they get the result they're looking for, they're good. If they don't have the damage, if something is not damaging to the tissue, or a drug does not hurt more people than it helps, it's got to help more people than it hurts. That's why when you see the television commercial and they read this whole list off, well, if you have this, don't do this, and if you have this, it'll impact your heart, it'll do this and do that. Always tell your physician if you have this. Well, there you go. But what they have is a drug that helps more people than it harms. And so those are the basis that they put things on. And that's how these devices work. So they're low frequency, they're high voltage low frequency, or they're low voltage low frequency. That's simply a matter of power. The low voltage low frequency devices don't get anywhere near thousands of Gauss. They get into the hundreds of Gauss, and there's plenty of opportunities where people like that, and it has worked for them in the past. Other devices get into the thousands of Gauss, and they work more rapidly, and that's the primary difference between the two devices. The low-power devices are very relaxing and they work, but you take longer treatment periods for longer periods of time to get the results you're looking for. With our type of devices, they have more energy being delivered, often in the thousands, and you notice I'm not saying multi-thousands, I'm saying often in the thousands, and they will allow the body to set itself up more rapidly. And many cases, and Dr. Dennis talks about this, people will use high-powered devices to get ahead, as I often talk about, the situation that they're dealing with, and then a low-powered device just to kind of keep things in place and moving along. Much like you get a massage, it feels very good, but then you go get a deep tissue massage once a month, and it really regenerates you, but you're a little painful afterwards, and then a more calm massage through the month with a vibration device, or your husband or your wife, or whatever the situation may be. So that's how these things kind of play out. I know I'm covering a lot of ground, but if you have any questions, please put them up. There are a couple of questions. Here's a question. How many amps does the Maia draw? I realize it will be different power levels, so what's at its highest setting? Well, basically, when you talk about amps, it only takes the power of a couple of light bulbs to power these machines. So when you talk about how many amps does it draw, very, very few, very low amps does it draw. And it doesn't take a lot of, it's not a situation that you're going to plug it in and you put it up to a 10 and it all of a sudden it doesn't work because it's drawing all the power out of the grid in your area, and that's not the case. If they'll run off cigarette lighters. They'll run off of chargers if you charge up a battery and want to use it that way. So the amps, very low, just a few. To put a number on it, I don't have that on the top of my head right this minute. But so that it's not a watts, same kind of thing. How many watts? What's the amps that it works on? They work on 110, and it pulls what a couple of light bulbs will pull to operate this machine. That's one of those things that someone could say, oh, it takes this many amps to do this to get it done properly. And that's, if you got power, the machine will work. Now, we've been in situations when you get into the horse world where people have been, you're in a barn and the power is fluctuating greatly and there's fans running and other devices running and all this kind of stuff, and you can get in there and are there issues in the barn with the device when that's happening? Can be, because the whole system is unstable because it's all run from a generator that's powering 10 different tents, and so you have a lot of situations like that. But even in those situations, it is very rarely has it been an issue as to whether or not there's enough power to not only run the device, but the fans and the neck stalls and the lights and so forth. Good question. I appreciate that. Does a PEMF machine's Gauss decline with use over time? Thank you, Linda. Does the machines, let me make sure I'm clear on that, does the PEMF machine's Gauss decline with use over time? No, I can't see any reason. Now, if you're talking about when you're controlling the intensity of the machine, on the older generation of machines that are powered by actual spark chambers, now I'm talking about the high power low frequency devices, the electrodes where the spark jumps back and forth can wear, but typically they would wear to the point that they can't get close enough together to give you a very low signal. In other words, if they're close together, the spark is traveling a small gap, if you will, which means it's quicker, which means it's a lower power being projected into the body. As those wear out, they can't get real close together. So, which meaning that the Gauss output is going to be higher because they can't get higher at that setting. If you turn your machine all the way down and it's still clicking at what would be a moderate setting, that means you can't get down because you can't get the two electrodes close enough together, which means you need to have your spark gap serviced or replaced, and bingo, you've got total connectivity, total control. But over time, will the use, no, you're not going to reduce the Gauss level. You can change the intensity levels that are delivered, or the levels of intensity delivered can change because of how you can manipulate this spark gap. On digital machines, that's all controlled by a board and computer type of chips, and so it's consistent wherever it's at. If you set it on a 3 or a 5 or however the devices work, you're going to get that consistency of intensity and Gauss delivered with each charge. Good question, Linda. Thank you for asking. I hope that was clear enough. If not, ask again, and I'll certainly try to clear it up. I'm asking because researching generators to power the Maia. Basically, a 200-watt generator, so a small gas generator, will work just fine. Honda makes them many, and there's most of those, Honda, Mitsubishi, Stihl, all those folks have generators, and so you just need a small generator. You don't need something that's going to power half of your house to run this machine. So typically a 200-watt, 300-watt generator will do just fine. The thing you want to look at is the fuel capacity. Some people have purchased generators that produce 100, 200 watts, and they got a small fuel capacity, so they're running out in a few hours. I wouldn't say necessarily get a great big generator of 500 watts that holds a lot more, because now you got to haul around a heavier generator. But that's the thing where people more often discuss is, well, I run out of fuel, so I got to be refueling it if it's a gas generator. So it's more about the fuel capacity than is the power that the generator puts off when you're talking about amps and generators. Great question, and thanks for telling me why you were asking, because that gave me an opportunity to clear that up. Let's see. Does the PEMF work on a speed pulse that bleeds after running? Let me make sure that's correct. Does the PEMF work on a speed pulse, I'm speed horse. Does PEMF work on a speed horse that bleeds after running? Where do you place the coil to help? Okay, we're talking about bleeders. So quite often race horses or horses that are in that type of stress levels will bleed. They'll bleed in their esophagus, they'll bleed coming off their lungs, and it causes problems with breathing. It causes problems, stress problems to their body. The answer is, can this be used to help free up the blood flow and make things flow more evenly through the body, so maybe it doesn't happen when they're running or happen with the stress amount when they're performing? The question is, it's been very beneficial when used in those areas. What would you treat? You would treat the lungs. On a horse, you're going to treat the upper lungs, upper part of the body. Why? We want good oxygenation in the blood, so the PEMF energy supplementation allows the blood to take on more energy, which can reduce inflammation, which will help cause the stress of the running for the bleeding. So you would treat the neck, the throat, the lungs, and basically an overall general body treatment as well, because we want all the blood in the body to be very healthy, flowing very smoothly, and to enhance situations so outside stresses do not have the impact on the body that they might have if everything is kind of not as healthy as it can be. So again, just to be treating the overall value of the horse, you treat the lung area to give good flexation, good oxygenation in the lungs, good blood flow through the lungs and the esophagus and the breathing part of the body. So you treat from the back of the head all the way down the neck, over the lungs, and the whole body at some point. But if you're in a hurry and you want to treat those areas, you're going to create some benefit for what you're looking for by allowing the horse to better facilitate its own blood flow and oxygenation. Great question. Thank you. Linda, thanks for the thank you. Let's see. How often would you suggest treating a bleeder? Well, that's the thing. Again, we're not treating the specific condition. We want to treat the horse to provide it energy so the body can better heal itself. I've had situations where you could have a session on a horse the day before or the day of an event, and they do better. We've had situations that you need to work the horse more continually, more regularly, perhaps a couple of times or 3 or 4 times before an event or before a race to get everything, again, in good shape. The challenge here, every horse is different. Every animal is different. Every person is different. So what helps my shoulder at a particular intensity and a level may take more energy for someone else's shoulder to get the inflammation relieved and the pain relief there. So it's hard to say. I can't say do this to this horse every time and this is the results you're going to get. It doesn't work that way. You need to develop a routine, and if you have a bleeder, you're not going to provide more sessions than are needed, so you would maybe work with it and learn. You would do it a few times leading up to an event, see how things go, do it immediately after to help the recovery, give the blood oxygen, the blood flow some relief so the recovery of the animal or the person is faster, so that's how you would work up to it. To be able to say that if we're going to have an event tomorrow that bleeding occurs and we're going to treat today and that's going to change that, but can't say that that's going to be the case. Build up, see what works, and then you'll develop a routine. And I'll tell you the story. This is how I learned this. I went to a barn. The trainer says, my horse is running tonight. Treat it today. And I treated and took the edge off the horse on that particular horse, and the horse didn't much care if it ran or not. And so what I learned at that point is in order to gauge this, we'll treat or we'll work on a horse, provide a session for a horse prior to a breeze. A breeze is when they work the horses in a race type of condition. For an athlete, it'd be the same thing. We're going to treat, we're going to provide a session, then they're going to go work out and do their thing, and to see what is the best time to treat or to provide a session in order to gain the optimum influence that we want on the body. So that's how you would build up to it. We began to provide sessions on horses just before they would breeze, and then they'd come back and say, this horse did better today. He was ready to go. So we know we can do it just before he runs. Other horses, we've learned you need to do them the day before, so the energy can move through the body, proliferate all the cells of the body, and then the horse goes out and runs like a champion the day after the treatment. Every horse is different. Every dog is different. Every person is different. That's the challenge. That's where training and discussions and things like this become valuable to you as practitioners, because you can educate your customers on what is best. What they want is a one treatment and I'm done. And isn't that wonderful? But that's not how it always happens. It might be one and done on this horse, and it might be 5 and done on the next horse. And it's the same thing across the board. Great question, and I hope I gave you some direction that you're looking for. Let's see. Okay, there's a bleeder. Any other questions, folks? If I missed something, I don't think I did. I'd be happy to answer it. I hope my Gauss description was adequate, but to kind of come back to that Gauss thing and repeat it just one more time as we're going, not the whole thing, but there's just so much out there with regard to levels that I have a machine that'll do it, that will measure it, but if I put the real numbers out there, people are going to say, well, you're too weak, or you're too strong, or you're this or that. So, we're talking in energy. We'd love to see more standardization take place. We'll step up and accept any standardization that anybody wants to propose. And I'm proposing that people use devices like this, standardize what they're saying, and get on that field so people don't feel so confused about what they're hearing. Reliability, reputability is very critical. I'm not trying to set ourselves up differently than anybody else, but I've been doing this for about 17 years, and I know where it's all over the board, and I don't want to be all over the board. I want to be straightforward and to the point. But I know how news travels, and so I want some standardization. I'd love to see standardization, just to keep everybody on a very educated playing field. So, any other questions? Happy to answer them. I'll be back here this afternoon at 2 o'clock to answer additional questions if you have some. It's amazing to me when we get into these office hour times, some of the questions that come up that folks do ask, and I'm just happy to do it. Transparency is the key. From my perspective, to be able to give you the best information we can, and to tell you how this works, so you can better utilize it for yourself, for your pets, and for your friends, if that is the situation. So, looks like things are slowing down here on the questions. We've been here about 40 minutes. I don't want to keep you, and I don't want to just sit here and rattle on. Cindy, you're welcome. She appreciates the information. Well, and we're glad to provide it. I'm just trying to think if there's anything I've missed in the great Gauss myth, Gauss and Tesla myths that are out there. I'm going to add a report or add a paper about this to the website that kind of explains this whole situation. And Dr. Dennis recently published an article, or a magazine published an article with an interview with Dr. Dennis, to where he really kind of covered the state of PEMF today, and covers a lot of questions like that I'm going to go through and discuss in these office hours, perhaps point by point, because I think it's important to get the facts. And probably the most stunning thing that he said was actually about when you start talking about power and you start talking about how this really works. It's so interesting to discuss with him and other people to see that we know it works. We just don't know how, what it does at the most minute level of the body, where it begins influencing and making things happen. So, I'm glad to be here. I'm so glad that you joined me this morning, and we certainly look forward to visiting in the future. If you have any questions that you'd like for me to cover on the office hours, send them to Magna Wave. You can send them to info@magnawavepemf.com. You could send them to me. It's Pat Ziemer, Ziemer, at magnawavepemf.com. And be happy to answer them. You can go to the website and the chat that comes up, and you can post a question in the chat box. And you quite often have it answered right as you're asking, but at the same time, if you have something that you'd like to see covered, put it in there, and we'd be happy to get to it and answer the questions. So, thanks for being with me. Look forward to visiting with you in the future. Have a great day. Bye-bye.